Welcome to Book Buzz Reviews and Summaries. Imagine trying to stay afloat in a sea of chaos while standing on what should be solid ground. You look around, and everyone else seems to be struggling too, treading water, gasping for air, trying to survive. Welcome to the reality of many communities living on the margins, where wellness isn't something you see on a glossy magazine cover or achieve with expensive yoga classes. It's a fight, a daily negotiation between survival and self-care, between isolation and communal support. Hood Wellness, Tales of Communal Care from People Who Drowned on Dry Land by Tamela Gordon doesn't shy away from the truth of this struggle. Instead, it dives headfirst into it, unearthing stories from people who have lived through the turbulence, not just in physical survival but in emotional, mental, and spiritual endurance. Gordon paints a vivid picture of what it means to find wellness in spaces where traditional resources are scarce, and yet, through the power of community, healing emerges in unexpected ways. Wellness in these communities isn't defined by juice cleanses, meditation apps, or personal trainers. It's about the aunties who look after the kids while their mothers work 2 jobs. It's about the elders who share wisdom during cookouts, the teenagers who hold each other up when the weight of the world becomes too much. It's about the unspoken bonds that exist in the barber shops, beauty salons, and on the front stoops where people congregate to process grief, celebrate small victories, and help each other stay grounded in the face of overwhelming adversity. Gordon explores these stories of communal care with a raw, unfiltered lens. These are not tales of people who overcame their struggles with a perfectly laid out 10-step plan to success. These are the stories of those who found wellness by piecing it together from the fragments of what was available to them, whether that was the comfort of a neighbor's kind words, the solace of shared laughter, or the quiet strength in simply knowing someone else was there, drowning too, but still standing beside you. In Hood Wellness, the reader is invited to reconsider what health and healing look like. It's not always about perfect self-care routines or picture-perfect mental health. Sometimes it's about navigating the rough waters of trauma, poverty, and systemic neglect, while finding moments of joy, connection, and resilience in the small cracks of everyday life. The stories in this book aren't just about the pain of drowning on dry land, they're about the beauty that can emerge when people come together in the midst of it. They're about the unseen networks of care that exist in every neighborhood, the resilience of people who refuse to be broken by their circumstances, and the radical power of communal wellness that doesn't just save individuals, it saves communities. This is a book for anyone who has ever felt like they're drowning while the world around them keeps spinning, for those who have found solace in unexpected places, and for those seeking to understand how healing truly works at the heart of marginalized communities. Hood Wellness is a testament to the power of care, love, and connection in the unlikeliest of places. Introduction, defining Hood Wellness. From the outset, Tamela Gordon introduces the concept of Hood Wellness as a form of survival and thriving that is distinct from traditional notions of wellness. While mainstream wellness culture often focuses on individual self-care, Hood Wellness is grounded in communal care. It's about people coming together to look out for one another when institutions fail them. It's about sharing resources, time, and energy, often in ways that go unrecognized by society at large. Gordon explains that this form of wellness emerges out of necessity. When healthcare systems, education, and economic opportunities fall short, people in marginalized communities find their own ways to care for each other. The book's title, Tales of Communal Care from People Who Drowned on Dry Land, serves as a poignant metaphor for those who feel overwhelmed or lost despite living in a world that should, in theory, provide for them. These are the stories of those who found life rafts in their communities, even when the world around them seemed indifferent to their struggles. Part 1, Drowning on Dry Land, Understanding Systemic Neglect. The first section of the book focuses on the historical and systemic forces that have contributed to the challenges faced by people in underserved communities. Gordon weaves together personal anecdotes with broader socio-political analysis, explaining how the lack of access to healthcare, education, and economic opportunities creates an environment where wellness becomes a communal effort. 1. A history of neglect. Gordon begins by laying the groundwork with a history of systemic neglect. She details how redlining, underfunded schools, and disinvestment in urban neighborhoods have created cycles of poverty and health disparities. These forces have left many communities with few options for formal healthcare and mental health support, forcing them to rely on informal networks of care. Through the lens of personal stories, she brings these issues to life. One story that stands out is that of a young mother who lost her job and her health insurance in the same month. Unable to afford a doctor's visit for her child, she turned to a community elder who had become the de facto neighborhood health expert. This elder, with no formal medical training but decades of experience and folk knowledge, was able to provide remedies and emotional support. 2. Drowning without water, the impact of stress. Gordon delves into the emotional and psychological toll of living in a constant state of stress. She explains how systemic neglect not only affects physical health but also mental wellness. Many of the people in these communities experience a kind of emotional drowning, struggling to keep their heads above water in the face of constant economic and social pressures. One of the most harrowing tales comes from a man who worked 2 jobs to support his family but found himself sinking into depression as he realized that no matter how hard he worked, he couldn't break free from the cycle of debt and instability. This, Gordon argues, is a common experience in these communities. People are drowning not because they can't swim, but because the water is too high, and they've been given no life preservers. Part 2, Communal Care, the Heart of Hood Wellness. The second section of the book shifts focus to the solutions that people have created for themselves in the absence of systemic support. Gordon illustrates how communal care emerges as a form of resistance and survival. This part of the book is filled with stories of hope and resilience, as Gordon introduces us to individuals and groups who have found ways to care for one another. 1. The power of the kitchen table. One recurring motif in this section is the kitchen table as a symbol of communal care. In many of the stories, the kitchen table becomes a place where people gather to share not only food but also advice, emotional support, and practical solutions to everyday problems. Gordon recalls her own experiences growing up, where her grandmother's kitchen table was the center of the neighborhood. It was at this table that neighbors discussed everything from health remedies to child-rearing practices, and where people who were struggling could come for a meal and leave with a sense of belonging. This kitchen table community was a form of grassroots healthcare, Gordon explains. People shared what they had and helped one another heal, both physically and emotionally. 2. The healers among us. Gordon introduces readers to the healers within the community, people who have taken on roles as caregivers, even without formal training. These healers might be the elder who knows herbal remedies, the neighbor who always has an open door for those in crisis, or the young activist who organizes mental health support groups. One particularly moving story is about a woman who, after losing her own child to gun violence, started a grief support group for mothers in the neighborhood. What began as a small gathering in her living room soon grew into a community-wide network of support. This woman, though not a licensed therapist, became a healer for others through her willingness to listen and share her own experience of loss. 3. Bartering for wellness. Another theme in this section is the idea of bartering for wellness. In communities where money is often scarce, people exchange goods and services in lieu of payment. Gordon shares stories of people trading childcare for house cleaning, or offering rides to the grocery store in exchange for a home-cooked meal. This bartering system, she explains, is a form of mutual aid that helps people meet their basic needs without relying on outside systems that have failed them. Gordon's own story of her mother, who often traded sewing services for groceries, is particularly touching. She recalls how her mother's small acts of bartering kept their family afloat and how these exchanges created bonds within the community. Part 3, Healing from Within, Mental and Emotional Wellness. The third part of the book focuses on the mental and emotional aspects of wellness. Gordon argues that in order to truly care for one another, communities must also address the trauma and emotional wounds that so often go unspoken. 1. The unseen wounds. Gordon introduces the concept of unseen wounds, the emotional and psychological scars that people carry with them. These wounds often stem from systemic neglect, poverty, and violence, but because they are not visible, they are frequently overlooked. She shares the story of a young man who had witnessed multiple shootings in his neighborhood but had never received any form of mental health support. Over time, the trauma built up, affecting his ability to function in school and at home. It wasn't until an older man in the community, who had experienced similar trauma, took him under his wing that he began to heal. This older man didn't have formal counseling training, but he provided a safe space for the young man to talk about his experiences and begin processing his emotions. 2. The role of storytelling in healing. Gordon emphasizes the role of storytelling as a form of healing in many Black communities. She explains that sharing stories, whether around the kitchen table, in church, or at community gatherings, allows people to process their experiences and find meaning in them. In one particularly moving chapter, Gordon shares the story of a woman who, after losing her home in a fire, began telling her story at community meetings. By sharing her grief and the challenges she faced in rebuilding her life, she found solidarity with others who had experienced similar losses. Over time, the act of storytelling became a form of therapy for her, and she began to see herself not as a victim, but as a survivor. 3. Spirituality as a source of strength. For many in the communities Gordon writes about, spirituality plays a central role in emotional wellness. Whether through organized religion or more informal spiritual practices, many of the people in these stories find strength in their faith. Gordon shares stories of church communities that have stepped in to provide support where formal systems have failed. She also explores how spirituality provides a framework for understanding and coping with trauma. One of the most poignant stories comes from a woman who, after surviving a violent attack, turned to her faith as a way to reclaim her sense of self. Through prayer, meditation, and the support of her church community, she was able to find peace and begin healing from her trauma. Part 4: Reimagining Wellness, Lessons for the Future. In the final section of the book, Gordon challenges readers to rethink what wellness looks like and how it can be achieved. She argues that while systemic changes are necessary to address the root causes of inequality, there is also much to be learned from the communal care practices that have emerged in underserved communities. 1. Lessons from the Hood. Gordon offers several key lessons that can be applied to broader discussions about wellness and healthcare. First and foremost, she emphasizes the importance of community. While individual self-care is important, true wellness cannot be achieved in isolation. She argues that mainstream wellness culture could benefit from adopting the principles of communal care that are so prevalent in marginalized communities. She also challenges the idea that wellness is something that can be bought or sold. In many of the stories she shares, people find wellness not through expensive treatments or luxury wellness retreats, but through the simple act of caring for one another. This, Gordon argues, is a model of wellness that is accessible to everyone, regardless of income. 2. The need for systemic change. While Gordon celebrates the resilience and creativity of the communities she writes about, she is also clear that these grassroots efforts are not enough. She calls for systemic change, arguing that the burden of care should not fall solely on individuals and communities. Part 5: The Role of Black Women in Communal Care. One of the most striking and consistent themes in Hood wellness is the central role that Black women play in the survival and well-being of their communities. Gordon spends much of the latter half of the book focusing on how Black women, often without formal recognition, have become the backbone of wellness in many underserved neighborhoods. Their contributions, from providing food and shelter to offering emotional and spiritual guidance, often go unnoticed by mainstream society, yet they are essential for communal survival. 1. The matriarchs of the community. In many of the stories Gordon shares, there is often a matriarch figure, an older woman who, through sheer determination, keeps her family and neighborhood afloat. These women often juggle multiple responsibilities, caring for children, working, and supporting their community. Yet despite their significant contributions, they are frequently overlooked by larger society. One of the most vivid stories in this section is that of Miss Mabel, a grandmother who, despite losing her husband and 2 sons to violence, became a pillar of strength in her community. Miss Mabel ran a small, unofficial daycare in her home, feeding and looking after children whose parents were working multiple jobs. She also became the neighborhood's go-to person for advice, offering a listening ear and a comforting word to anyone who needed it. Miss Mabel's story is emblematic of a larger truth in many underserved communities. Black women, through their roles as caregivers and community organizers, often act as the glue that holds everything together. Gordon celebrates these women not just as survivors, but as community leaders who, through their acts of care, are actively shaping the future of their neighborhoods. 2. The emotional labor of Black women. Gordon also highlights the emotional labor that Black women take on, often without acknowledgement. In addition to their physical and logistical contributions, these women are often the ones who provide emotional support to their families and communities. They listen to the stories of trauma and pain, offer comfort, and act as a buffer between their loved ones and the harsh realities of the outside world. One of the most touching stories in this section is about a woman named Shonda, who, after losing her brother to gun violence, became the emotional rock for her family. Shonda's mother, unable to cope with the grief, fell into a deep depression, leaving Shonda to care for her younger siblings. In addition to managing the household, Shonda took on the emotional labor of helping her siblings process their grief, all while struggling to make sense of her own loss. Gordon emphasizes that while this emotional labor is often seen as invisible, it is just as important as the more tangible forms of care. Without people like Shonda, who quietly hold their families and communities together, many of these neighborhoods would struggle even more to survive. Part 6. The intersection of race, class, and wellness. Gordon is careful to situate her discussion of communal care within the larger context of race and class in America. She argues that the systemic neglect faced by underserved Black communities is not just a result of poverty, but also of racism. Throughout the book, she emphasizes how the intersection of race and class creates unique challenges for these communities, and how communal care has become a form of resistance against a system that consistently marginalizes them. 1. Racism as a barrier to wellness. In this section, Gordon examines how racism, both institutional and interpersonal, acts as a barrier to wellness for many people in underserved Black communities. She explains how the healthcare system, in particular, has historically failed Black communities, leading to mistrust and a reliance on informal networks of care. One story that exemplifies this is that of a woman named Keisha, who, after being dismissed by multiple doctors, turned to her grandmother's herbal remedies to treat her chronic illness. Keisha's story is not uncommon. Many Black people, especially women, report that their health concerns are often downplayed or ignored by medical professionals. As a result, they turn to alternative forms of care, such as traditional healing practices or community-based support networks. Gordon argues that this mistrust is not just a result of individual bad experiences, but is rooted in the long history of medical racism in America, from the exploitation of Black bodies in medical experiments to the ongoing disparities in healthcare access and treatment outcomes. She calls for systemic changes that address these racial disparities and argues that true wellness cannot be achieved until these barriers are dismantled. 2. Class and the cost of wellness. In addition to racism, Gordon explores how class affects access to wellness. She critiques the commodification of wellness in mainstream culture, where practices like yoga, meditation, and organic eating are often framed as luxuries that only the wealthy can afford. In contrast, the people in the stories she shares find wellness in everyday acts of care and solidarity, often without spending any money at all. For example, Gordon tells the story of a group of women who started a free fitness class in a local park after realizing that none of them could afford gym memberships. The class, which included everything from aerobics to meditation, became not only a way for these women to stay physically healthy, but also a space for emotional and spiritual healing. Through this and other stories, Gordon challenges the idea that wellness is something that must be bought, and instead presents it as something that can be cultivated through community and creativity. Part 7. Strategies for Thriving in the Hood. While much of Hood wellness focuses on the struggles faced by marginalized communities, Gordon is equally committed to exploring strategies for thriving. She argues that wellness is not just about surviving in the face of adversity, but also about finding joy, meaning, and fulfillment in everyday life. 1. Building networks of care. One of the key strategies for thriving that Gordon discusses is the importance of building strong networks of care. She emphasizes that no one can do it alone, and that wellness in underserved communities often comes from the relationships people build with one another. Gordon shares the story of a man named Marcus, who, after losing his job, found support in an informal network of men in his neighborhood who were all struggling with unemployment. The group, which met weekly at a local barbershop, became a space where the men could share job leads, offer emotional support, and even pool their resources to help one another with bills. Through this network, Marcus was able to find a new job, but more importantly, he found a sense of belonging and solidarity. Gordon argues that these kinds of networks are essential for thriving in environments where formal systems of support are often absent. She encourages readers to look for ways to build and strengthen these networks in their own communities, whether through organizing, volunteering, or simply showing up for one another. 2. Reclaiming joy. Another strategy for thriving that Gordon discusses is the importance of reclaiming joy. In many of the stories she shares, joy becomes an act of resistance, a way of asserting one's humanity in the face of dehumanizing circumstances. Gordon argues that finding moments of joy, even in difficult times, is essential for mental and emotional wellness. One of the most memorable stories in this section is about a group of women who, despite living in a neighborhood plagued by violence and poverty, started a dance group that performed at community events. The group became a source of pride and joy for the women, who saw their performances as a way of reclaiming their bodies and their spirits. Through dance, they were able to express themselves, build confidence, and find a sense of joy and purpose. Gordon emphasizes that reclaiming joy is not about ignoring the challenges and hardships of life, but about finding ways to create and celebrate beauty, connection, and happiness in the midst of those challenges. She encourages readers to look for ways to bring more joy into their own lives, whether through creative expression, community activities, or simply spending time with loved ones. Part 8, Moving Forward, A Vision for Collective Wellness. In the final section of Hood Wellness, Gordon looks toward the future, offering a vision for what collective wellness could look like if we take the lessons of communal care seriously. She argues that while individual wellness is important, it is not enough. We must also work toward collective wellness, where the health and well-being of the entire community is prioritized. 1. From surviving to thriving. Gordon envisions a future where underserved communities are not just surviving, but thriving. She argues that this can only happen if we move beyond a focus on individual self-care and toward a model of collective care. This means advocating for policies that address the root causes of inequality, such as affordable housing, universal healthcare, and fair wages, as well as building strong, supportive networks within our communities. She shares the story of a community garden project that started in an empty lot in her neighborhood. The garden, which was initially created to provide fresh produce to families who couldn't afford it, soon became a space for community gathering and healing. People from all walks of life came together to tend the garden, share meals, and build relationships. Gordon sees this project as a model for what collective wellness could look like, a space where people come together to care for both the land and each other. Conclusion: Reclaiming Wellness in the Hood. As we close Hood Wellness, Tales of Communal Care from People Who Drowned on Dry Land, Tamela J. Gordon leaves us with a powerful and transformative understanding of what wellness truly means in marginalized communities. This book has been a journey through real stories of struggle, resilience, and survival, stories that are often overlooked but are deeply necessary to understand the full picture of health and wellness in urban environments. Gordon shines a light on a critical truth: wellness isn't just about physical health or material success. For communities of color, particularly in under-resourced areas, wellness is a holistic experience, one that includes emotional, mental, spiritual, and communal care. In neighborhoods often neglected by mainstream institutions, where people feel they are drowning on dry land, survival has been a communal effort. Hood Wellness demonstrates that in these spaces, the path to wellness is a collective journey. It thrives in shared resilience, mutual support, and an unbreakable sense of community. One of the most impactful messages in this book is that wellness is not a luxury, it's a necessity. But in areas where systemic inequalities and trauma have made life an uphill battle, the pursuit of wellness looks very different than in more privileged spaces. Gordon masterfully highlights how people in the hood find wellness, despite the odds. From block parties that build connection to the aunties offering wisdom and healing, from the corner store conversations to the unofficial therapists on the stoop, wellness in the hood is deeply intertwined with the people. The strength of hood wellness lies in its redefinition of self-care. Gordon pushes back against the commercialized, individualistic wellness culture that focuses on spa days, expensive therapies, and self-help books that cater to those who can afford them. She centers the conversation around accessibility and affordability, reminding us that wellness, in the hood, is rooted in everyday actions, like sharing food with neighbors, checking in on friends, and holding space for one another's emotional needs. As the stories throughout this book reveal, there is no singular path to wellness. Healing, recovery, and growth happen in many forms and at many paces. Sometimes, it's a quiet moment of reflection. Other times, it's finding strength in organizing for justice, and still other times, it's through laughter shared with loved ones. Gordon's exploration of this communal, grassroots approach to wellness speaks to the power of togetherness and redefines what it means to be well. In closing, Hood Wellness challenges us to rethink what care looks like for those who've been left behind. It asks us to recognize the beauty in communities that have learned to thrive on their own terms, despite being dealt with overwhelming challenges. As readers, we are left with a deeper appreciation for the resilience of the hood and inspired to contribute to a world where wellness isn't just possible for some, but attainable for all. Please read the book to learn more and consider subscribing to support the channel. Thank you.